You probably think of ancient woods as these timeless, untouched wildernesses, right?
Yeah, those places of quiet refuge.
Exactly. Places where humans just visit, snapping a few photos and leaving only footprints.
A very romantic image.
Right. But what if the lush, magical forests you love, the ones that feel straight out of a fairy tale, are actually abandoned industrial sites?
It is a profound shift in perspective.
It really is. Today's deep dive is into Luke Barley's fascinating book, Ancient: Reviving the Woods That Made Britain.
And our mission today is to fundamentally change how you see those woods.
We want to reveal them not as wild, untouched nature, but as incredibly complex human artifacts.
Yes, artifacts shaped by centuries of intense labor.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core contradiction we're going to explore today is that to save these beautiful ancient woods, we actually need to fire up the chainsaws and cut down trees.
Which sounds incredibly counterintuitive at first glance.
Oh.
But to understand why, we have to explore millennia of history. We're stretching all the way back to the Bronze Age and winding right through the Industrial Revolution.
It's a massive timeline.
It is. Barley's research paints this incredible picture where human survival and woodland ecology didn't just exist side by side in Britain.
They became totally interdependent.
Exactly. The natural world you see in an old forest was actually sculpted by human hands working the landscape.
And before we get into all the chopping and the chainsaws, we really need to define what counts as an ancient wood.
Right, because it doesn't mean it's been sitting there totally untouched since the dinosaurs.
Yeah, ecologists use a very specific benchmark. It's called the 1600 rule.
Yes. The technical definition of an ancient woodland in England is simply land that has been continuously wooded since the year 1600.
Which, seems like a weirdly specific, almost random date to pick for something biological.
It does seem arbitrary.
Why not 1500? Or
Yeah.
1066?
Well, it actually has nothing to do with biology. It has everything to do with cartography.
Oh, maps.
Precisely. The year 1600 aligns with the earliest reliable, comprehensive maps in England.
Ah, okay.
And the logic behind it is really elegant. Before the year 1600, people in Britain weren't really planting new forests for timber or conservation.
They were just cutting them down.
Right, they were generally only clearing them for agriculture. Therefore, if a piece of land was definitively documented as a wood 400 years ago, it's highly likely it was never cleared at all.
So it's probably remained wooded in some form since trees first recolonized the island after the last ice age retreated.
Exactly. It's a continuous, unbroken line.
That makes so much sense. But it makes me wonder about the places where maps burned down or were just never drawn in the first place.
That's where you have to become a detective.
Right. Barley talks about how when the historical record fails, you have to look down at the dirt.
You look for ancient woodland indicators.
Yes, these specialist plants. Things like the delicate whitewood anemone, herb Paris, and of course the iconic English bluebells.
What's fascinating here is why these specific plants act as such perfect historical barometers.
It all comes down to their incredibly poor ability to travel, doesn't it?
It does. They cannot easily recolonize what we call secondary woods.
And secondary woods are basically newer forests that have grown up on land that was previously cleared and plowed for farming.
Right? Because if you run a heavy plow through the dirt,
you completely shred the intricate, fragile underground root systems and fungal webs that these plants rely on.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And they do not bounce back quickly. Take the wood anemone, for example.
Okay.
Its seeds are relatively heavy and typically fall just 20 centimeters away from the parent flower.
Tiny centimeters a year.
A year, yes. Yeah. So if you walk into a forest and see a vast, dense carpet of wood anemones stretching off into the distance,
you are looking at a population that has been slowly, painstakingly creeping across that exact patch of undisturbed soil for centuries.
If not millennia.
It's mind-blowing to think about plant life moving at that kind of geological pace.
It really reframes your perception of time.
It does. And reading this book, it's honestly terrifying to realize how close we came to losing all of that deep history.
The locust years.
Yes, Barley spends time detailing the locust years. This was the period right after the Second World War.
And it was devastating for ancient woods.
The context of the post-war era is crucial here.
Extremely crucial.
Yeah.
Britain had just survived a grueling conflict where German U-boats had severely disrupted timber import.
So there was an intense, lingering anxiety about timber shortages.
combined with the massive need to rebuild a bombed-out country.
Right, so the government basically went into a panic and pushed for total modernization.
The Forestry Commission started aggressively planting commercial conifer plantations everywhere.
They took these incredibly diverse, broadleaf ancient woods and either bulldozed them completely to make room for more farmland,
Or they underplanted them with things like Sitka spruce.
these fast-growing, non-native evergreens.
Exactly. And the problem with Sitka spruce is that they cast a remarkably dense, dark shadow year-round.
And that deep, permanent shade is catastrophic for ancient woodland indicators.
It essentially suffocates the forest floor. Meanwhile, the pine needles acidify those precious, undisturbed soils.
That is just heartbreaking. During these locust years, nearly half of Britain's ancient woodland was compromised or destroyed.
Which brings us to the heroes of the 1970s.
People like the legendary ecologist Oliver Rackham and George Peterkin.
Yes. They realized that these old woods were irreplaceable historical documents.
You couldn't just plant a new pine forest and call it a fair trade.
No, the history is in the soil itself. So they created the Ancient Woodland Inventory.
An absolutely massive, painstaking undertaking to map and list every remaining scrap of ancient wood.
Just so they could be legally defined and protected from being paved over or planted with cash crops.
They fundamentally shifted the paradigm.
They did. But in doing so, they highlighted something really crucial.
Protecting these spaces didn't mean putting a fence around them and walking away. Which brings us back to our core contradiction. There's this incredibly vivid, almost cinematic scene early in the book.
It's a great scene.
Barley is out in an ancient wood. He is covered in sawdust, wielding a roaring chainsaw, and he is actively cutting down trees.
Making a huge mess.
Right. And suddenly, a dog walker comes marching through the undergrowth, visibly angry, shouting over the noise of the engine that Barley is supposed to be saving the lovely wood, not destroying it.
A very understandable reaction.
Totally. So what does this all mean? How on earth can firing up a chainsaw be an act of conservation?
It all comes down to an ancient practice known as coppicing.
Coppicing.
Yes. Coppicing involves cutting certain species of broadleaf trees like hazel, ash, or sweet chestnut right down to their stump.
But instead of dying, the stump, which woodlanders refer to as a stool, springs back to life.
Exactly. It sends up multiple straight, highly vigorous stems.
And this isn't some new forestry hack, is it?
Not at all. Barley points out that archaeologists excavating the Somerset levels found the sweet track.
Oh, the elevated wooden walkway built across the swamp.
Yes. It was constructed using perfectly straight poles of coppiced wood, and it dates all the way back to 3800 BCE.
That is wild. People have been managing woods this way for nearly 6,000 years.
It was the ultimate industrial engine of the ancient world.
Today, we tend to view wood simply as a building material.
But before the widespread mining of coal, coppiced wood provided the raw material for practically everything.
The thin, flexible rods were woven into fences, baskets, and walls for houses.
The thicker poles became tool handles, furniture, and carts.
If you wanted to build the soaring, intricate vault of a medieval cathedral, you obviously needed massive, mature oaks for the main beams.
Of course. But the sheer volume of smaller wood required to keep a society running was staggering.
And the biggest consumer of all was fuel, specifically charcoal.
The scale of the historical charcoal industry is difficult for us to fully grasp today.
Charcoal is essentially wood that has been slowly baked in an oxygen-starved environment until all the moisture and impurities are driven off.
And what remains burns much hotter and steadier than regular firewood.
That intense heat made it absolutely essential for smelting metal.
Right. From the Bronze Age all the way through the Industrial Revolution, if you wanted a sword, a plowshare, or a cannon,
You needed charcoal.
and the conversion rate was brutal. It took roughly 30 tons of harvested wood to make enough charcoal to smelt just one single ton of iron.
30 tons.
Right.
To feed that insatiable demand, generations of woodlanders intensively managed these forests,
They would cut them in a sustainable rolling cycle.
clearing one small section of the wood entirely, letting it regrow for maybe 10 or 15 years, and then moving on to the next section.
And here is the massive ecological plot twist that I completely didn't see coming.
Right, because you would naturally think all that intensive, relentless human harvesting century after century would just devastate the local wildlife.
But Barley shows that the exact opposite is true.
When we finally shifted to coal and fossil fuels, we abandoned the coppicing cycle.
The woods were left alone.
And they grew tall, neglected, and far too shady.
The author cites incredibly compelling research from the British Trust for Ornithology to back this up.
The BTO.
Yes. They found that to bring back a true bioabundance of wildlife, meaning not just one or two rare species, but a massive teeming volume of gnats, bees, butterflies, and the songbirds that eat them, the woodland canopy cover needs to drop below 20%.
Wow, below 20%.
The forest floor absolutely requires abundant light and warmth to explode with life.
Okay, but wait, I have to ask a dumb question here.
Go for it.
Why doesn't chopping a tree completely in half just kill it? Trees didn't evolve over millions of years just to provide perfectly straight poles for human carpenters.
That is a pivotal evolutionary question, and the answer goes back much further than human history.
Okay.
Millions of years ago, during the Tertiary period, these temperate woodlands were profoundly different.
They were being actively browsed, crashed through, and completely smashed by extinct megafauna. We are talking about super elephants and giant super rhinos roaming around Europe. Here's where it gets really interesting. The trees evolved this incredible biological mechanism to spring back from a violently broken stump just to survive being trampled and snapped by these prehistoric giants.
And because those massive beasts went extinct long before we started managing the woods, humans with axes and chainsaws unknowingly took their place.
We essentially became the giant herbivores.
It is a profound realization.
Yeah.
By systematically cutting the trees to take what we needed for survival, we inadvertently maintained the dynamic sunlit clearings that the broader ecosystem completely depended on.
We stepped into an ecological void.
We did. But coppicing isn't the only way our ancestors interacted with the trees.
Right. Barley transitions the narrative to a place called Ashted Common to explore a completely different yet equally vital historical landscape.
Wood pasture.
I found the wood pasture section so fascinating because it breaks all the rules we currently have about how the countryside should look.
Today, if you go for a drive, woods are for trees and open fields are for livestock. A fence separates them.
But for thousands of years, they were the exact same place. A wood pasture was a communal landscape where large, spreading trees and grazing animals existed right on top of each other.
Which presents an immediate practical problem.
Yeah, if you have hungry cows and pigs wandering around your woods, and you cut a tree down to a stump to harvest the wood,
those animals are going to immediately eat the tender, highly nutritious new shoots springing up from the ground. The tree would never survive.
So the woodlanders had to get creative. If you can't keep the pigs away from the shoots, you put the shoots out of reach of the pigs.
Exactly. They utilized a technique called pollarding.
Pollarding.
The biological principle is identical to coppicing you. You're cutting the tree to stimulate a flush of new harvestable poles.
But instead of cutting it at ground level, the woodlanders cut the tree 8 or 10 feet in the air,
safely above the browse line of the livestock.
Over centuries of repeated cutting, the trunk of the tree swells into a massive, bulbous, heavily scarred base called a bowling.
This created a landscape that supported an entire way of life.
Let's talk about the commoners who relied on this. It wasn't just a casual farming technique.
No, it was a deeply ingrained communal system.
Everyday people had legally protected ancient rights to these shared wood pastures.
They had the right of pannage,
which meant every autumn they could drive their pigs into the woods to gorge on the fallen acorns and beech mast, fattening them up for winter.
And they had the right of estovers,
which allowed them to gather dead wood and small branches to heat their homes.
The woods were their larder, their hardware store, and their heating supply all rolled into one.
But that communal way of life was systematically dismantled.
Largely by the enclosure movement, which peaked between 1760 and 1870.
This was a profound and often brutal social and physical transformation of the British landscape.
It's hard to overstate how devastating this was. Imagine relying on a local forest your family has used for generations.
And suddenly landowners pass an act of parliament, throw up miles of impenetrable hawthorn hedges and wooden fences, and lock you out.
They privatized the land to maximize agricultural profit, usually for sheep farming.
It wasn't just an economic blow. It completely severed humanity's deep, daily, physical connection to the woods.
And we are still dealing with the ecological fallout of that severance today.
When the commoners were legally locked out, the pollarding cycle stopped.
But the trees, of course, kept growing.
Right, and you can see the danger of that neglect if you walk through an old wood pasture today.
You see these ancient, abandoned trees that have grown massive, incredibly heavy, multi-stemmed crowns stretching high into the sky.
All resting on top of those ancient, rotting bulbous bowlings.
They're completely top-heavy.
When a bad storm rolls in, they act like giant sails and are incredibly prone to just splitting right down the middle and collapsing.
Now, losing those specific ancient trees would be an incalculable ecological disaster.
It really would.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not just about losing a picturesque old tree, it's about what lives inside it.
Inside those rotting, hollow bowlings are mind-boggling micro-ecosystems known as saproxylic ecosystems.
Saproxylic meaning they rely entirely on dead and decaying wood.
Correct. A staggering 7% of Britain's entire invertebrate fauna relies exclusively on dead wood.
We are talking about highly specialized, incredibly rare beetles.
Beetles that can only complete their life cycle by laying their eggs inside the specific decomposing fungal mass of a chicken of the woods or beefsteak fungus.
Fungi that only grow deep inside the heartwood of an ancient oak.
To understand the value here, Barley quotes Oliver Rackham's famous rule of thumb.
10,000-century-old oaks do not equal the ecological value of one 500-year-old oak.
The sheer volume and complexity of the decay just isn't present in a younger tree.
It really makes you rethink what a healthy tree looks like.
We tend to think a rotting tree is dying, but ecologically, it's just getting started.
Absolutely.
And reading this totally shattered a myth I grew up with. I always pictured the ancient pre-agricultural wildwood, the landscape before humans arrived, as this incredibly dark, dense, closed canopy forest covering the entire island.
There is that famous old saying that a squirrel could run from the East Coast to the West Coast without ever once touching the ground.
It's a very compelling romantic image.
But the modern ecological evidence simply doesn't support it. Barley highlights the groundbreaking work of an ecologist named Franz Vera,
who proposed what's now known as the Vera hypothesis.
Vera argued that the pristine wildwood was never a solid, unbroken blanket of trees.
Instead, it was a dynamic, ever-changing kaleidoscope.
Exactly. It was a constantly shifting mosaic. You had open grassy glades, dense patches of thorny scrub, and mature groves of trees.
And this landscape was kept in a constant state of flux because it was continually being smashed open, grazed down, and physically altered by massive wild herbivores.
We're talking about elk, wild boar, and the aurochs.
Which was an absolutely massive, aggressive species of wild cattle.
And what's amazing is we don't just have to guess that this is how it worked. We're seeing it happen in real time at modern rewilding projects like the Nip Estate.
They basically took this heavily farmed land, stopped managing it so rigidly, and brought in free-roaming, grazing animals.
Longhorn cattle, Tamworth pigs, Exmoor ponies.
To act as modern proxies for those extinct megafauna.
This raises an important question. How does the wildlife respond to that kind of chaotic disturbance?
The results are explosive. Endangered birds like nightingales and gorgeous rare insects like purple emperor butterflies are suddenly thriving there in massive numbers.
Because, as it turns out, they don't actually want a dense, dark, tidy forest.
They specifically need that messy, thorny scrub, the broken branches, and the open ground that large grazing animals create.
The evolutionary adaptations to these animals are incredibly specific.
Barley shares a truly astonishing detail about certain species of solitary tunneling bees.
These bees evolved over millennia to lay their eggs exclusively in patches of bare, sun-baked, churned-up earth.
But how does bare earth form in a grassy wildwood?
It was created specifically by massive male aurochs aggressively digging and scraping bull pits with their hooves and horns during their mating displays.
It is absolute madness to think about. The entire life cycle of a tiny bee is fundamentally tethered to the aggressive mating rituals of an extinct 2-ton herbivore.
The connections are just so impossibly deep.
And speaking of deep connections to the past, we have to talk about my absolute favorite detail from the whole book before we wrap up.
The small-leaved lime tree.
Barley calls this the ultimate ancient woodland indicator.
It is a remarkable species. What's fascinating here is its sheer resilience and its survival strategy.
If you look at the ancient pollen records, they show that the small-leaved lime was once a dominant, widespread canopy tree across huge swaths of Britain's wildwood.
But the global climate shifted.
The British climate hasn't actually been warm enough in the summer for the lime tree to successfully set viable seed since the Bronze Age.
Wait, I need to pause and emphasize that. The Bronze Age.
Think about everything that has happened in human history since then. The Romans, the Middle Ages, the Industrial Revolution.
And through all of that, this tree hasn't been able to reproduce by seed.
Instead, it survives by basically refusing to die.
Its biological workaround is brilliant.
When a lime tree gets old or heavy and finally falls over, it doesn't just rot away into the soil.
It roots its fallen trunk and branches directly into the dirt and sends up a whole new ring of fresh vertical shoots.
It essentially clones itself.
Over thousands of years, these individual trees have been slowly collapsing, rerooting, and quite literally walking their way across the forest floor.
They are practically immortal. When you are out on a weekend walk and you stand next to a sprawling, tangled lime thicket, you might be looking at a single living organism that has been creeping around that exact same hillside since the glaciers retreated.
It is a profoundly humbling perspective on time.
Truly.
And I think that beautifully synthesizes the core philosophy of this entire deep dive.
What Barley's book ultimately proves is that nature in Britain is inextricably intertwined with human history.
For millennia, our desperate daily need for wood unintentionally replicated the chaotic, light-filled environments previously created by extinct megafauna.
Therefore, if we want to save woodland biodiversity today, we cannot simply step back behind a fence and leave the woods alone.
Passive neglect brings deep shade, and that darkness stars the intricate ecosystem on the forest floor.
We have to actively participate. We have to pick up the tools, replicate the actions of both the lost beasts and our working ancestors, and actively restore the light.
It demands engagement.
So next time you take a walk in a local wild forest, I want you to really look closely.
Look at the weird, swollen shape of a multi-stemmed tree, or a strange, shallow ditch running through the undergrowth.
You aren't just looking at untouched nature taking its course. You are walking through a living, breathing museum of human survival.
Ask yourself, what if the most natural thing you can do for a landscape isn't to leave it totally alone, but to pick up a tool and become a working part of its ecosystem once again?
And it leaves me with one final wild thought. If our historic intensive industrial logging accidentally saved these woodland ecosystems by mimicking giant rhinos, what modern destructive human habits might actually be harboring hidden wildlife right now?
It makes you wonder.
Are the neglected, weed-choked urban train tracks or the cracked asphalt of abandoned shopping mall parking lots going to be the highly protected, bioabundant, ancient woodland indicators of the year 3000?
It certainly makes you look at our modern concrete jungle in a whole new light.